Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Glad to have this man on. He is a major media star. He's on radio. He's on television. He's doing podcasts. He's writing books. It's Brian Kilmeade. Brian, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on, Joe.
You know, Brian, let me ask you something. How did you find time to even do this interview? I mean, literally, if I turn on Fox right now, you're on. Or I'm reading one of your books or your radio show is going on. I mean, your day is what, 18 hours long? 19, 20?
Well, today was one of those days with the book coming out today. I was on, when I go out outnumbered, that'll be 7 straight hours. I'm going to do Gutfeld tonight, which I try to do once a month at least. And it's, it's your vision, what I tell people is picture a big gym. They tell you where to go. And then they say, hey, do you want to help us out here? Can you do 4 minutes with Martha? Hey, Jesse's out on Friday. Can you fill in? I got the Saturday night show. So you just walk over there, and it's all the stuff that we've been studying all day. So be able to work your contacts, talk to people. It's hard to turn it down.
Well, Brian, let me say this. You're a guy from Long Island. I'm Amityville is where I was born. Copeg is my hometown. You're Massapequa, right?
Yep.
All right, so Long Island people grew up differently. It's like we grew up saying, at 7 years old, I wanted a job. You know what I mean? So if you're walking around and somebody says, Brian, can you? Your answer probably is yes.
Yeah, I remember getting working papers to work at, I think it was 12 or 13. And I ended up, I think I told you this story. I walked my whole town, and the last store in my whole town was Cal Seinfeld Signs. And
Wow.
Jerry was just breaking through, and I didn't really know him. I didn't know of him then. And they said, I go, I can't paint. He goes, well, would you hire every Saturday? And I worked every Friday after school and Saturday, going out with those guys on the truck, and then ends up being Jerry Seinfeld's dad was my first employer.
Can you imagine? And there's something different in the water, I think. It's Brian Kilmeade, of course, media star, Fox News Channel. He's got his radio show. He's got a new book out. It's called Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed the Path for Racial Equality. Brian, I've got to ask you before we get into the book. Everybody wants, they say, you have a Kilmeade on? You got to ask him. Has anything changed at Fox News Channel with Rupert stepping down? I don't see any change as a viewer, and you seem to be doing everything that you were doing and then some. Any change that was noticeable for you?
No, Lachlan is much more visible than any other management team. Like, we'll see him at major events. I wouldn't be surprised to see him at the Patriot Awards next week. He comes to big things. My daughter is going to be going to Australia for a semester.
Oh,
he
wow.
heard about it, told me to come up and wanted to know what school I was going to and what questions that she should ask her counselor. So he's just a great guy. I mean, if you ever see him, if you ever meet Lachlan out, he is what he appears to be. He's a regular guy. He loves rugby. He talks about, he knows football. I was there the day the USFL and XFL merged.
Okay.
And he's like, yeah, I got this on my lap. It looks like we're going to merge. Got to figure out what the name of it's going to be. But it's so unassuming. So it's just it's a great place to work. It's very, very streamlined.
Well, I know that people love everything that you do, and I appreciate you taking time for me. And it's good to hear that nothing changed. I hate when there's a change of management, and suddenly everything's got to be different because even if it was working, I've got to put my mark on it. But he was already involved, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, he's a great editor. So he's always saying, it seems to me, and I wouldn't be in those meetings, but, the meetings with all the executive producers, senior
Right.
producers, and when he would come in, he says this unbelievable news instinct, and he would have a feeling of what the American public wanted, and he'd ask questions. If you ever see Rupert Murdoch, he asks you more questions than you will ever ask him.
Wow.
And
That's
that's
very cool.
that's type. He's always curious about that. He's always
that's why
got curiosity about him.
It's why they're in the information business, I would guess. I've never met Rupert or Lachlan or anybody like that. I was on Fox a lot. I think you and I talked about this in the 2005 to 2010 range. And we were doing 4 and 5 hits a week, but it turned out I had to go to a studio. Brian, if it was like this, I could have kept on doing it, because I've got a studio now that's very close to me, if you know what I mean. But then you had to drive, 60 miles to go to the studio, sit down and do the whole thing. But Fox News Channel has been a staple. Can you believe it's been since 1996? That's crazy.
Yeah, I started filling in '96
Wow.
and got the job in '97. So I've been smart enough to hold on to it. But now we do this. So, I mean, this is broadcast quality. I'm looking at the quality of your picture.
Yeah.
I need a better backdrop, but the quality of your picture is broadcast quality.
Yeah.
So, and that's one thing they could do. The one thing they had to do, I remember being in meetings before the pandemic, and they go, well, I don't like Skype. I don't like Zoom. Excuse me, no one ever heard of Zoom.
Right.
There was another competitor, and then all of a sudden they said, okay, not only are we embracing Skype, that's what you're going to host the show on. So things really accelerated through that. So I got to let them know you're available, because what you're broadcasting on this on is exactly the quality we would be on. You wouldn't have to go anywhere.
Well, I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to get a job, but God bless you. I'll appear anytime that you guys need me.
Yeah.
Brian Kilmeade, Fox News host, author, of course, of great books. The latest one is Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed the Path for Racial Equality. Let me just ask you this first, and then let's get into this meeting where Teddy Roosevelt had the dinner with Booker T. What do you think those two icons would think about the term equity that we use today?
It's exactly the antithesis of what they talked about. The
Yes.
thing that attracted Teddy Roosevelt to Booker T. Washington was the book Up from Slavery. And they both loved self-made men. There's plenty of excuses. There's so many excuses, legitimate excuses for you can't be successful. You can't do something, especially if you were born a slave. I mean, that's a pretty good excuse. But
Right.
instead, I got to learn to read. I got to learn to write. I got to get out of the salt mines. I have to get an education. I got to go to college. I have to find a way. I have to start at college, become a teacher, start giving back, find out what it takes to change a generation of African Americans coming off one generation of slavery. How do I get them involved and catch them up? And what you do is, not only do you start Tuskegee, but in Tuskegee, you learn a trade. In Tuskegee, you learn hygiene. You learn the basics of running a home. All the things that maybe you take for granted growing up in a different society, working class or upper class. They realized that had to be done. And guess who knew that? The guy that was born a slave, that slept on the floor and had the same thing to eat 3 times a day
Right.
for the first 8 years of his life. He talked about nutrition, and everyone, guys, I don't want to hear you can't do it. Learn a trade, make bricks, become a bricklayer, work in construction, work in agriculture. So when you left, if the white people aren't ready to hire you or anybody, you're going to be too invaluable to not be coveted by someone. And he did it 1,500 people at a time for every day of his adult life until he was, I guess, 25, until he passed away at 59. So, started with 30, and he just kept building up this school. They're all about self-made men.
It's Brian Kilmeade. The book is Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed the Path for Racial Equality. What boggles my mind is that we allow the government, I mean you and me, but we allow the government to disincentivize people and tell them you don't have to learn the trade. You don't have to go and be part of the system. It's easier to complain about foundational or systemic racism and then get a check, or maybe even tell the dad, you don't even have to be in the house. We'll take care of the kids if they're born with welfare and whatever else. This is not something that is just inherent to one race of people. This is what our government did over 100 years, telling people don't do what Booker T said do. How do we fix that? Can we?
Well, a lot of people are upset in the black community about Booker T. Washington. They don't embrace his legacy. Not saying all of them. Obviously, when you talk about Byron Donalds, when you talk about Colonel West, when you talk about Daniel Cameron,
Ben Carson, right?
Ben Carson. You can't. If you start off to ask him about him, you better have a half hour.
Right.
So, but other people don't like it, and they feel as though he was too accommodating. But he was in a Jim Crow South, where
Yes.
they lynched you if you dated a white woman, or assumed you dated a white woman, where there were poll taxes, and they prevented you, some Ku Klux Klan would prevent you from going to the polls.
Right.
And that's the place he went back to start a college and to change that. And Teddy Roosevelt knew it had to be changed. And Grant knew it had to be changed. So how do I do that? I can't do everything all at once. You have to pick your spots.
Yes.
And he found the perfect partner. And when you talked about that dinner, that was referenced by John McCain. And in my special on Fox Nation, that's how I ended. John McCain says, back in the turn of the 20th century, there was a big scandal when Booker T. Washington came and went with Teddy Roosevelt and had dinner with his family. And now, talking about being a gracious winner, there'll be a black man hosting that dinner. That's how far America has come. So why can't I go back and talk about the men and women that brought us there? I mean, he had 2 wives die tragically. They all of them worked at the school. Women were welcome at the school. They became teachers. They learned a trade too. We're going to change things. I'm not going to judge. If the Joneses don't like me and the Johnsons do, I'm going to work with the Johnsons, but I don't hate the Joneses.
Right.
But sooner or later, they're going to notice that there's no difference between us. And they're going to notice not by yelling at him, not by legislating it, by just seeing they're going with what they're seeing. Look at the way these men and women hold themselves. Look at the pride in which they have. Look at how productive they are. Man, maybe my parents were wrong about there being a difference in races. And people were upset at Booker T. Washington for saying, you went back to the South, you didn't stand up here, you didn't make a stand here. He goes, well, I had to worry about Tuskegee. I had to be welcomed in Alabama. I couldn't stay in Boston and take shots. I wanted to change the South in the South. And not everybody was racist and bigoted, but that's how they were brought up. They were people of their times. And little by little, they changed people by the thousands who were capable of being changed. And I'll give you one anecdote that he wrote in The Larger Education, and he wrote in Up From Slavery.
Okay.
So Booker T. Washington and Teddy Roosevelt had this dinner, and he was waiting for a train. And as he's waiting for a train, a man walked up to him and said, "You're Booker T. Washington. You're one of, if not the greatest man in America." And he said, "Thank you, sir, but it's really the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt." He goes, "I used to think so until he had you over for dinner."
Wow.
Now think about that. There's so many layers to that statement. He did not know he was insulting him. He was ignorant. He wanted to compliment him, but he's like, you're not is that to say, you're not equal, right? You're not equal to me. I just respect you. But that's when his words after that was, that's when I realized I had to let sleeping dogs lie. Can't help him unless he has a revelation in his life. But I'm not going to hate him. And he says, when you give somebody the luxury or the compliment of hating them, they're taking up time with you. He goes, do not put, and I'll use my words, your self-esteem is not for sale.
Right.
So he would bring that everywhere. So if that door got slammed in his face when he was walking around in Massachusetts trying to get some benefactors for his university, these doors would slam, others would open. He'd tell his story. I don't hate you guys. Sooner or later, you'll realize what I'm doing. And that's how he persevered in life and did what he did. But he did it with people like Teddy Roosevelt, like General Armstrong, who nobody knows but ran Hampton College, and these great people in his neighborhood in West Virginia. They didn't see color in a time in which everybody else did.
But by the way, if you say I don't see color today, it's called a microaggression. I mean, I mean that. People, so you're taking my ancestry away. But if you do see color, it's because I'm this or I'm that. But you really can't win today. Can you imagine, by the way, it's Brian Kilmeade, media star, of course, Fox News Channel. His new book is Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed a Path for Racial Equality. Can you imagine had there been social media? Because back then you've got a paper and a quill. And people were writing, I'm sure, that Teddy Roosevelt was a no good this and that, and the Booker T was a no good this and that. How dare you have dinner with this guy? Can you imagine what would have happened had social media been around?
Oh, it would have been nuts in a matter of seconds, and it would have been insane. But it might have been shorter lived. This thing lived forever. They could not shake it, and it adjusted the way they dealt with each other. Because they said, "Listen, we got to be smarter about this. I know there's nothing wrong with us having dinner together, but unfortunately, all of America doesn't agree with that." So they didn't alter their relationship; they changed the nature of it.
Brian, were they friends? Were they friends?
Yes. Oh, deep respect for each other. And they talk about Edith and he getting a pre-release of his book Up From Slavery. And they both said, Edith said to Teddy, we got to meet this guy. And they met in New York City, and he was vice president. He said, if I become president, if anything I could do to help you. He said, well, why don't you just come down and see Tuskegee? And as he's doing, he goes, yeah, I got this trip planned. After that, I'm coming. Well, McKinley gets shot, dies a week or two later.
Right.
And next thing you know, he's president. And we found the letter that he wrote to Booker T apologizing that he's not going to be able to come and see Tuskegee. But I promise to do it. And he would. He'd give the commencement address, and he would eventually join the board. And you got to see his remarks. He was just in awe of what he saw.
Brian Kilmeade, go get this book. It's Teddy and Booker T. He was a civil rights leader, certainly. I think Martin Luther King Jr., for me, was the last civil rights leader, true civil rights leader. Those who call themselves that today are not. I think they're dividers, and I think they're people actually who have gotten very rich on using that division. Can we get back to that same mind sense that Teddy and Booker T had? And the reason I asked if they were friends, like, you don't have to be friends with somebody you have a good partnership with. I just wondered if personally they liked each other as well. But can we get back to that? Is there a person that can show up on the scene and then be the person that says, not only should we be united, now we can focus on where the troubles are in the individual races and ancestries? Can that happen again?
I think so. I mean, I'm already noticing changes. Although, let's just put I did an interview and someone said, well, I'm doubtful that I'm too optimistic because what's happening with these people rallying to the Palestinians' cause because
Right.
they look like the oppressed. But I
Yeah.
will say this: I'm not hearing things about before NFL games. Let's sing the black national anthem and then the other national anthem. And I'm not hearing things that the American flag is a trigger. I'm seeing uh, Hard Knocks, and I'm seeing Aaron Rodgers with his arm around Becton,
Yeah.
talking about why don't you come over for dinner tonight? And I don't think it's a big deal. I'm back to the way we used to think rather than everybody thinking about race and you better not say that.
Right.
Because I think the people that gave us this have watched their lives be ruined by the cancel culture they started. And they said, how the hell did we get here? And I think that's all part of it. And I think we're going to realize, again, sports might have to lead us there, and maybe it's leading us again there, like it has in the past. That when you go to, when you go and play a sport, you go to camp and you are part of all this, and you go through the wars with these people, you don't care what color or skin they are. In fact,
Right.
you embrace their different background. One thing I think I told you before, Joe, is that playing soccer in retrospect was the best because no Americans were playing when I was playing. So literally, I was one of 4 Americans on my college team. And they'd be like, "Oh, put the Americans over here, the Tobagans over here."
Right.
We had 4 Israeli fighter pilots at Division II. You could play at 25 years old. You could be a freshman. So I
Wow.
had guys who were shaving at halftime. I didn't shave till 3 years after college. So you get so tolerant. I think I see the Somali guy. I know he's going to be a great forward. I see the Greek guy. I know he's going to be a great back.
Right.
You stereotype in all the good reasons. I have this guy from Nigeria. He was the only guy. I was great at long distance with no foot speed. He was the only guy who beat me every time long distance. He was on the track team. So I was used to stereotypes in a good way, but I
Yes.
couldn't care less about people's background. And again, sports kind of led you there as a player, and then you watch it as a fan. And I just imagine this. They don't. I didn't write about it in the book because I can't put myself in the time.
Yeah.
But when people ask me what did they do, there's also stuff they didn't. They don't know that they did. How many little 7-year-old boys and girls looked up and saw Teddy Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington, pictures of them at Tuskegee, pictures of them at the White House, pictures of them together and them talking about each other and thought, there's no difference between the races. Look
Right.
at these guys, black and white. They're not talking about the color of their skin. How many people changed their views, even if their parents told them they were wrong, and saw an equality rather rather than a diversity of races? Oh, the
Right.
blacks and whites are different.
Right.
How many people just saw these guys working together and the respect they gave? And not just Teddy. I mean, he was good friends with Taft. He was great friends with McKinley. They just had mutual respect. Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Julian Rosenwald. So the most powerful people of those times, they would sit there and just talk about how to make the country better. I loved it. It was inspiring.
I'll tell you this, Brian. Growing up and then getting into media, I've been in media now since '89. I never believed the story that if you see somebody that looks like you or has a name like you or that has an ancestral background like you, you're more apt to go do that. I was the hardliner that said anybody can do anything. It's a land of opportunity.
Yeah.
You don't have to see somebody who does it who looks like you. But what you just said, that story does resonate now because Tiger Woods. When Tiger Woods showed up, it was less than 1% black players in golf, and kids were not learning how to play golf if they happen to be black. They saw him play. Suddenly there was a flood of young black children, boys and girls, that were saying, I can play that game too. Great.
Yeah.
So I think that's the story you just related about them in the pictures. It must have really spoke volumes to people in the black community who thought we're just the ancestors or the descendants of slaves. We can't do those things.
Yes. And
Did Tiger? Did
there's
you
no
see that
doubt,
effect
there's no
from
doubt about
Tiger
it.
as well?
I know there's no doubt about it with Tiger because I feel
Yeah.
like I almost came up with him. I mean, my first job was Channel One, and they told me I was out on the West Coast doing a story, and I think it was Pete Sampras,
Okay.
and he had just broken through. And they said there's this guy named Tiger Woods whose father fought in Vietnam, and he named him after the guy he fought with that disappeared. That he still had hope that he was going to be alive, and he thought if he named his son Tiger, that he knew he'd become famous, and then somehow he would realize they were alive. So whatever that story was, I
Amazing.
remember pitching that story of this teenager before he was Tiger Woods, who we all know that went to Stanford and then went pro and did what he did. So I remember pitching that story out there, and that was part of it. Is that a lot of kids weren't doing it back then. And then I got a chance to meet Earl Woods and talk to him about that. And he was with all his flaws, he was a no nonsense guy too. Yeah, if you had a race problem, I'm walking right through you. Unlike the Williams dad, Richard Williams, who I felt was a little different. I could never figure
Yes,
that guy out, but
he
I
was.
covered him too.
I mean, and the story about the pictures, that really just resonated with me because I had a change of heart. You know, as a talk show host, and you're a talk show host, we sometimes lock into our opinion because we've done all the research. We think we know it all. And then Tiger Woods showed up and I went, holy crap, that really does work that way, which was amazing. So I think this was the predecessor to that. But so many people don't learn this. I want people to go get the book, Teddy and Booker T, How Two American Icons Blazed the Path for Racial Equality. I know this is why you do it, because you, like me, realize that we're not being taught history anymore. I didn't know about this dinner until I started researching your book. I honestly, and I should have known about this because this was 100 years before Tiger Woods. And this is around the era, by the way, of Jack Johnson, the boxer, who was treated like garbage because he was a black guy beating the white guys. So this really was a turn of events in this country that should still be felt today. But Ryan, we don't, because nobody talks about it. So thank you for doing the book. Are you getting that sort of reaction? Holy crap, I didn't even know this story.
It's day one. And I get a lot of that. And the one thing I have is too is like people who are much smarter than me will say with these stories, I didn't know that. That's why I studied for 3 years. So you look into it, you think you got something. It was kind of interesting, Joe, and you'd appreciate this, being able to go to Tweed Roosevelt. You went to Sagamore Hill probably as a kid. That's where Teddy Roosevelt's last house was.
Right.
After reading Booker T. Washington, seeing the references to Teddy, I said, let me just go find out because Tweed Roosevelt's around. I met him. And I just said, do you think, and he became a historian of his great grandfather. I go, do you think I'm wrong here? He said, well, I don't think you're wrong, but he does say some things that shows he's got blind spots. You know, no one's going to say that he was some revolutionary as if he was born in 2023. I go, I got it. So people look at this and they'll look at Teddy Roosevelt and they'll say some things about the races that he wouldn't agree with later in his life, but he actually said, just like Lincoln. And it shows that he was a person of his times. But most of his life, he was way ahead of his times.
Yeah,
and he was willing to be first on everything. And I think a lot has to do with the fact that he was born with asthma, almost died multiple times, was beat up a lot as a kid. Even though he had money and wealth, he could not hang out with the other kids. His parents were scared to death he would die. So he wasn't allowed out really until he got to college. So he had a sense of what, even though he was a rich kid, he had a sense of what it was like to be the other guy, you know, to not be with the cool kids. And that's what I think that he kind of plays out throughout his whole life.
The book is out today. It's Brian Kilmeade, of course, from Fox News Channel. Also, he's got a great talk show. Listen to everything he does, watch everything he does, and read every book he writes. Teddy and Booker T is out today. How Two American Icons Blazed the Path for Racial Equality. Brian, it's always great to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for coming on today. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely, Joe. Continued success. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.